So I'm welcoming Tina-Rae here today. And Tina, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, about your work, and we'll get right into it from here.
I'd love to. Thanks for having me. I work with HSPs, which are highly sensitive people. I come from a background in the service industry predominantly. I've also got a very entrepreneurial spirit, so I'm keen on working with things and building things that interest me and inspire me, and hopefully inspire people out there as well. So I'm a doer, I'm a learner, I'm a lover of life and people, places, and things, and I'm here to hopefully make the world a little bit better.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
My pleasure.
So I want to ask you about the highly sensitive person. So what exactly is a highly sensitive person? Is this a diagnosis, and where does that all come from?
So it means highly sensitive person, HSP, it's often referred to as the acronym. And it means it's someone who has sensory processing sensitivity, which essentially means that a part of our brains are wired a little differently than the majority of the population. It's seen in 20 population approximately, over 100 different species. So birds, fish, animals, even insects, they've been able to identify a different trait in 20% of the things I just mentioned. In the early 90s, it was Dr. Elaine Aron, who is a clinical and research psychologist, together with her husband, that started investigating love and relationships and communication and how it all works in the brain. So that's how it came to be back in the early 90s. And I'm actually very surprised that it's not more predominantly talked about, and there's not a lot of education out there about high sensitivity. So high sensitivity can be seen as a label, and HSP is technically a label. And if you wanted to get into the science of it, it's actually sensory processing sensitivity is the term, which is not a disorder or a diagnosis. It's not the same as sensory processing disorder. So there is an actual disorder, but it's a sensitivity. So it's downgraded in us. It's not a diagnosis, as I said. So many doctors that I've come across, at least, don't know about the trait. It's something that we're born with. It's just how we're wired when we're being made. And it's really important, I think, to educate the medical system definitely on high sensitivity, because it can often be perceived as being bipolar, depressed, high anxiety. So it's all about not knowing how to manage those emotions, and doctors want to, of course, help us, so they prescribe us medication. But in reality, what we need is to understand ourselves, our emotions, and how to deal with the sensitivity and over processing that we tend to do.
And so you're obviously very passionate about this subject. So how did you get interested in it? Are you one?
I most definitely am one. It makes me a little bit emotional when I think of it, because I was taking my certification course to be an integrative health coach. And in our program, we were given a lot of different, we were exposed to a lot of different tests out there, like the Myers-Briggs testing, personality testing, and high sensitivity was one of the quizzes that we were instructed to take to see if we were one, and also to understand a potential client better and know how to work with them. So if there are certain, A-type personality, we would speak to them differently than we would a softer personality, such as an HSP, who doesn't really like to be told what to do, or let's say, dealt with harshly, let's say. So that's how I learned about it. I remember when I was doing the reading and I did my quiz, I exclaimed, like I said out loud, "Oh my God, I'm not messed up, I'm an HSP." It just seemed to bring all of my history and my emotions and my interests and my dislikes into perspective. It just gave me a whole way to reframe me.
Mm-hmm. And so, how do you relate to this now that you know you've discovered this trait, as you say? How do you relate to it as an identity, as a label, now that you know about it?
Well, I really relate to it, especially at times where I feel like I'm different or I'm alone, or I start judging myself for the things that I think and feel. I can always go back to the fact that I know that I'm an HSP, and I know that 20% of the population are HSPs. And all I have to do is reach out to another HSP or reach out to another HSP community, which I am part of, and there's people there who understand me. So it helps me not feel alone in this world. And I know that I have a community that's going to support me in whatever it is that I need to vent about or share something positive about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it sounds like it's really important to know about that aspect.
Definitely.
Otherwise, so before you knew what it was, how did you relate to yourself?
A lot of self-criticism, self-judgment. I've been told many times that I'm too hard on myself, and HSPs can tend to be perfectionists, and to the point where we delay and delay because things are not perfectly the way we want them to be. So I'm learning that I have to let things go and just do my best and ship it the way it is, or execute or make a decision the way it is without overthinking and over processing and looking at things, 100 different ways to make sure that I'm making the best decision. So I believe that trusting ourselves is one of the best things that not only HSPs, but everyone can do for themselves in their life. Because if you trust yourself and you trust that there's a power higher than yourself that guides you, that you can communicate with, then that's always there for you, and you're always here for you as well. So I tend to not overthink things. I still think about them a lot, but I don't overthink it, and I make a decision, and then I know that I can correct from there if I need to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned about being treated harshly. I want to learn a little bit about that. So for highly sensitive people, if they're treated harshly, there's a certain reaction. So can you paint a picture of that?
Mm-hmm. My dad's Lebanese, and they've got very strong personalities. And even now, my dad tells me that I was quiet as a child and I didn't say much, which tells me that I have been an HSP since birth. And that culture can be very harsh. So there was some harshness in my upbringing that could have been better dealt with if they had understood who I was. It's been some judgments from people. Like, one of the things that HSPs are often told is we're being too sensitive, or we need to toughen up, or we need to get a thick skin, or we're kind of weird or crazy, or we're just overthinking, or over processing. So, which is what we do, and that can be really traumatic for an HSP, because either we retaliate and we seem like we're grumpy, angry, hurtful. So when we don't know how to moderate our words and what's actually going on and have the mental awareness to stop ourselves before we speak, we can say things that can't be taken back, words cannot be taken back. Or we withdraw and don't say anything and retreat. And there's been many times where I just shut down, walk away. I have hid in a closet before as an adult. I'm not ashamed to say. I just didn't know how to deal with my emotions. So yeah, harsh words can really hurt us.
Mm-hmm. 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 So if we dive into HSP, what are the key markers? What are the key points that sort of, you know, we can check them off in the box?
Mm-hmm. There are many questions out there to see if you're an HSP. On my website, there's 5 on the homepage. There's a more in-depth quiz. There's 20 questions. But the acronym that Elaine Aron developed, this doctor in the early 90s, was DOES. So it stands for depth of processing, which means that we process everything through our senses a little deeper, a little more meaningful, in different ways than the majority of the population does. O is for overwhelm. So we are easily overwhelmed and overstimulated by the things in our environment. So, you know, bright lights, noises, too many people, crowds, too many things to do, not enough sleep can really overstimulate us and cause us to be either reactionary or shut down. And I like to help people learn how to respond to their world instead of react to their world. So the E stands for emotional reactivity. As I said, we can, you know, lash out, blurt out things that we don't really want to say, but are just there because it causes a feeling in us because we're so sensitive. So we can be reactive instead of responsive, which doesn't serve us. And the S is for sensing subtleties. So oftentimes HSPs are the ones that are very aware of their environment and things around them, and they can tell if something in a room has been moved, either in their room or in an office. We tend to sense body language and facial expression a little more acutely than the majority of people. So we're highly aware. Okay. So sensitivity to subtlety. So those are the main marks. There are other key factors as well, and if you want to research it, you can go to my website, find out a lot of information, or do the research yourself. But those are the key markers. So depth of processing, overstimulation, emotional reactivity, and sensitivity to subtlety.
So then, living in this world, there must be ways that you found imbalance yourself as a HSP, things that maybe are not so helpful to an HSP, as well as helpful things. So what have you noticed would be hindering to the HSP?
Living in a city. I know for me, now that I live in the country, I am so grateful. And I find when I do go into the city that it can be overwhelming because it's fast paced, it's busy, it's bright, it's loud, it's, you know, things that are really stimulating to the nervous system. And because we have tender nervous systems, we tend to appreciate the quiet. I mean, we can still function in the world, obviously, but our society that you know, embraces consumerism and success, what success generally means is wealth and power and possession. And to me, those are not the important things. To me, feeling peace in my soul and in my heart and in my mind is more important to me than getting things. And I started, you know, working with HSPs because I want people to realize that there's more to the hustle than needs to be. It doesn't need to be like that. So basically living in the world and buying into what our culture's vision of success is. You know, you have to have a family, you have to be in a relationship and have a good job and have a nice house, and that just, it doesn't serve me, and I suspect that it doesn't serve a lot of HSPs because we're more emotional than physical, tangible.
And is there anything else that you found that sort of throws the HSP off balance?
Again, having too much to do. So breaking things down into little tasks, little steps, and actually writing them down can take the anxiety out of our mind and put it onto paper so that we can more clearly see what needs to be done in a way that will get us there quicker rather than ruminating over it too much. I've learned some things and some tips and tricks to help with that, especially when in the moment you're feeling anxiety, if you'd like me to tell you about those. So I've learned a few things that have really helped me calm down, especially in the moment where I'm feeling overwhelmed. And I actually have a free downloadable PDF on my website at Tina-Rae.ca where I'll just go over these points very quickly for you. So the first one, when you're feeling overwhelmed in an instant, is to close your eyes and visualize some positive imagery, whether that's the face of someone you love or a swaying palm tree or your cat or your dog, whatever will bring you back to present moment awareness, but close off this visual sense. So that's number one. Number two is, I knew this was going to happen, so I wrote it down. Breathing. Stop and breathe. Well, you're going to breathe anyway, so you may as well make it the most effective breath that you can. So one of the things that I practice and really helps to calm me is breathing in for 4-4-7. So you basically breathe in through the nose for 4 counts, you hold it for 4, and then you breathe out for 7, which will fill your lungs with oxygen, and it will also push oxygen to the prefrontal cortex, and it calms down your heart rate. And then there's tapping. There's emotional freedom technique, which I recommend doing 3 to 5 cycles of this. It only takes a minute or 2, and we have a pressure point on the karate chop part of our hand here. You just tap that with the 3 fingers of the opposite hand and say to yourself, I'm feeling very overwhelmed in this moment, but I love and accept myself completely. And do a round of about 3 to 5 of those. That'll help bring down your anxiety level as well. Another one is focusing on your senses. So you can start with anyone that you like. If you have a stone in your pocket or your purse that you like to rub, the sensation of that on our fingers can really bring our mind to that attention. We can take in some smells that are around us if they're pleasing. We can choose to look at flowers if they're in the vicinity, or a child or an animal. And hear, what do we hear around us right now? Is it birds chirping, or is it the hum of the refrigerator, people chatting in the background? So whatever sense that you want to focus on and turn the volume up on, that will help calm you in the moment, is what I recommend. And of course, if you can, carry a little journaling notebook with you so that you can write down your feelings. And when you write them down, get to the pinpoint of what the feeling is. So for example, if you're feeling overwhelmed for all the things that you have to do for work, ask yourself why you're feeling overwhelmed. If it's because you have a project to complete and you're afraid you won't complete it on time, ask yourself why. What's going to happen if I don't complete it on time? Well, my boss might see me as incompetent, or that I don't take my job seriously. And if that happens, then why? What happens after that? Well, I'll lose my job. You know, so on and so on, all the repercussions that might happen because you don't get that project completed on time. So oftentimes we are motivated by 2 things, fear or love. So in those moments of overwhelm, are we focusing on something that we're fearful of in the future or in the past that will affect our future? Or are we focusing on love? So if you can shift your focus from things that we fear to things that we love, you know, it will definitely calm us in the moment and eradicate that fear, or at least reduce it.
Oh, thanks for that. Those are some excellent things to keep in mind for HSP people. And now, when you discovered this, I'm imagining you were an adult. However, you had been hardwired this way ever since you were born. So what do you wish you had have known when you were in your teens or even childhood or in your 20s? And for parents that have HSP children, or they, you know, think they might, what can you say to them?
Mm-hmm. Wow, I wish I had learned about this such a long time ago. I wish I had learned about it in my early teens when I started to feel angsty, and I was an angry teenager. I was a metalhead, and spent a lot of time by myself and listening to music. And I did write. I wrote some poetry, so I was creative. But if I had known that I was an HSP, I would have learned how to process my feelings better. And I think I would have been more creative and given myself more compassion and self-care, and known to take the time for me. And I would have also taken the time to understand other people, because that's one of the key markers of HSPs, is that we're very empathetic and compassionate. But when we don't know that we're an HSP, it can turn into abuse for ourselves, and we can even abuse people with our words outwardly if we don't understand. So we can be some of the most compassionate, empathetic people. And I wish my parents had known that I was one, because it would have changed how they interacted with me, I think, and they probably would have asked me more probing questions. So I would encourage parents, especially ones who have difficult children, to investigate their personality and why they might be acting out or lashing out, or not the ideal child, which I'm sure not too many children are. But yeah, I think it would really help parents understand their children and help them grow up to be more well-rounded, empathetic individuals. So one of the things that I would really, really love to see, and I definitely want to get involved in, is helping educate parents on the potential that they may have an HSP child. So even in school systems, if there was just a little something, a handout perhaps to go home with an elementary school child to give to their parents about the trait of HSP, or in high school in, I don't know what kind of course that you would call it, but somewhere in the school system, just making teenagers aware that you might be an HSP. Are you feeling this way and this way? And these are the reasons that you may be feeling that way. And then definitely in university, there could be, HSP groups for some university students, flyers up somewhere, if not in the system itself, because it may have to be part of a course that they elect to take. Definitely some awareness around social activities and HSP would be great. Another area I want to get involved in is in corporations. So how corporations can best embrace HSPs, who also make very good leaders, because we tend to be the ones who listen, because 70% of us are introverts and 30% are extroverts. It makes us good listeners. We're empathetic, we're compassionate. We like to understand people because we strive to understand ourselves. So we can be great leaders if we can harness our power, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like your journey and understanding HSP is all about acceptance of how you are, and learning how to work with yourself and accept and understanding. So I hope that those who are watching also find that for them. And if they're looking and striving to learn more about this, they can connect with you, right?
Most definitely. The best way to see what I do and what I'm all about is my website, Tina-Rae.ca. So Tina-Rae.ca. You can email me at hspcoach@Tina-Rae.ca. I'm on Instagram at Tina-Rae HSP Coach. You'll find me there. And I post all kinds of things there because I want people to get a sense of who I am. I'm not just, I don't just want to educate people and inform people. I also want them to embrace all the beauty of an HSP, which is that we see things and we feel things and we're creators. And one of the key factors about most HSPs is that we strive to create meaning and connection. So many HSPs who are musicians, artists, painters, poets, philosophers, if you look back, they are HSPs. And in our ancestors' times, they were the shamans, the intuitives. They knew when to move and where to find food, and they were more connected. I guess you could look at it like they were more concerned with being than doing.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, thank you so much again, Tina.
Yeah,
Tina-Rae.
you're so welcome. Thank you very much for having me.